Rachel's apartment was small, barely 800 square feet of worn linoleum and secondhand furniture. She was a single mother of two, working double shifts at the diner just to keep the lights on and food in her children's bellies. Every dollar was counted, every meal planned down to the last ingredient. She had exactly $43 to last until Friday, and it was only Tuesday. By any reasonable measure, she had nothing to spare. But as she watched that woman's shoulders quake in the cold, something deep in Rachel's chest pulled tight. She thought of her own mother, gone 5 years now, who used to say that wealth wasn't measured in what you kept, but in what you gave away when you had little to give. Rachel grabbed her raincoat and stepped into the storm. The woman looked up as Rachel approached, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. She was younger than Rachel had expected, perhaps in her mid-30s, with frost forming on her eyelashes and lips turned blue from the cold. Her designer handbag seemed oddly out of place with her situation, and her shoes, though muddy and soaked, had once been expensive. "Please," Rachel said, raising her voice above the wind. "Come inside." "You'll freeze out here." The woman hesitated, then nodded, too cold to speak. Rachel helped her to her feet and guided her across the street, supporting her weight as they climbed the stairs to the apartment. Inside, Rachel wrapped her in blankets, turned the heat up despite knowing it would mean a higher bill she couldn't afford, and made hot tea with hands that trembled slightly from adrenaline. "I'm Rachel," she said gently, handing over the steaming mug. "What's your name?" "Catherine," the woman whispered, her voice hoarse. "Catherine Wright." She took the tea with shaking hands, holding it like a lifeline. "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would help me." Rachel's 7-year-old daughter, Emma, peeked around the doorway, curious. "Mama, who's that?" "A friend who needed help, baby. Go get the extra pillow from my room, okay?" As Emma scurried off, Catherine's eyes filled with tears. "You have children, and you still let a stranger in." "My mama always said we're all just strangers until we're not," Rachel replied, settling into the chair across from her unexpected guest. She didn't ask questions, didn't pry into how a woman with expensive accessories ended up stranded in a storm. She simply made up the couch with clean sheets, offered Catherine some of her own clothes to sleep in, and made sure she had everything she needed. That night, Rachel lay awake in her bed, listening to her children breathe in the next room and wondering if she'd done the right thing. $43. 3 days to go. But then she remembered her mother's voice, steady and sure. Do the right thing even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Morning came with weak sunlight filtering through the curtains. Rachel woke to find Catherine already awake, sitting on the couch with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the door as if waiting for something. Her clothes from the night before were folded neatly on the coffee table, cleaned as best as Catherine could manage with hand soap in the bathroom sink. "I can make breakfast," Rachel offered, mentally calculating how far she could stretch 3 eggs and half a loaf of bread. Before Catherine could answer, there was a sharp knock at the door. Rachel opened it to find a tall man in an impeccable suit standing in her hallway, looking severely out of place among the chipped paint and worn carpet. Behind him stood 2 other people, a woman with a tablet and a younger man carrying a briefcase. "Ms. Martinez?" the man said, his voice formal but not unkind. "My name is James Thornton. I'm the chief of security for Wright Industries. I believe you have someone here we've been searching for all night." Catherine stood up from the couch, and suddenly Rachel understood. The expensive bag, the designer shoes, the way she'd said her name with that slight pause as if waiting for recognition. "Dad's going to be furious," Catherine said quietly, moving toward the door. "Your father is worried sick," James replied firmly. Then his expression softened. "And he's right downstairs, Miss Wright. He insisted on coming personally." What happened next felt like a dream. A man in his 60s, distinguished despite his rumpled appearance and obvious exhaustion, burst into Rachel's small apartment. His eyes locked onto Catherine, and the relief that flooded his face was so raw, so genuine, that Rachel felt like an intruder in her own home. "Kathy," he breathed, pulling his daughter into his arms. "Thank God, thank God." Catherine wept into her father's shoulder, and through her tears the story tumbled out. She'd been driving from a charity gala, had gotten into an argument with her fiancé over the phone about prenuptial agreements and money and control. She'd pulled over to think, and when she'd tried to start the car again, it had died. Her phone had fallen into a puddle when she'd gotten out, ruined instantly. She'd been too proud, too angry, too stubborn to ask for help at first. And then the storm had hit, and she'd found herself stranded, anonymous, with no way to prove who she was or access the wealth that had always been her safety net. For the first time in her privileged life, Catherine Wright had been truly vulnerable. The man turned to Rachel, and she recognized him now from occasional news clips and magazine covers. Thomas Wright, founder and CEO of Wright Industries, one of the wealthiest men in the country. "You helped my daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "when you had every reason not to." "She needed help," Rachel said simply. "That's all there was to it. James told me about you. Single mother, 2 jobs, barely making ends meet. And you still opened your door." Thomas pulled out his phone, made a call, and spoke in low, urgent tones. Then he looked at Rachel with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You gave my daughter shelter when she had nothing. You gave without expecting anything in return. That's rare. That's precious. And that's going to be repaid, whether you like it or not." "I don't want—" Rachel started, but Thomas held up his hand. "I know you don't. That's exactly why you deserve it. Here's what's going to happen. Wright Industries has a new community outreach program I've been developing, focusing on scholarships and support for hardworking families. You're going to help me run it. Full salary, benefits, reasonable hours so you can be with your children. You'll identify people like yourself, people who work hard, who sacrifice, who deserve a chance, and we're going to help them." Rachel's mind reeled. "I'm not qualified for something like that." "You're more qualified than anyone I could hire," Thomas said firmly. "You understand struggle. You understand sacrifice. You understand what it means to give when you have nothing. That's the only qualification that matters." The woman with the tablet stepped forward. "There's also the matter of your current debt. Ms. Martinez, student loans, medical bills, credit cards, we'd like to handle those. And this apartment," the younger man with the briefcase added. "Mr. Wright would like to purchase the entire building, renovate it properly, and ensure you and your neighbors have safe, affordable housing." Rachel's legs felt weak. She sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "Why, this is too much." Catherine knelt beside her, taking her hands. "Last night, when I was out there in the cold, I kept thinking about all the times I'd walked past people who needed help. All the times I'd looked away because it was uncomfortable or inconvenient. I have everything, and I've given nothing that truly mattered. You have so little, and you gave everything you could. You taught me something I should have learned years ago." Her voice cracked. "You saved more than my life last night." "You saved my soul." Thomas nodded, his eyes glistening. "Money can't buy character. Ms. Martinez, it can't buy compassion or kindness or the kind of instinct that makes someone step into a storm for a stranger. But money can create opportunities. It can change lives. It can multiply the good that people like you do in the world. Let me do this. Let me help you help others." Rachel looked around her tiny apartment, at the water stain on the ceiling she'd stopped seeing years ago, at her children's drawings taped to the refrigerator, at the life she'd built with grit and love and stubborn determination. Then she looked at Catherine. At this woman who'd been brought low and lifted up, who'd found humanity in her darkest moment. "Okay," Rachel whispered. "Yes." The weeks that followed transformed Rachel's life in ways she'd never imagined. The job was real, demanding, and deeply fulfilling. She found families struggling to keep their heads above water and connected them with resources, scholarships, and opportunities. She became the bridge between wealth and need, guided by her own experiences of hardship and her mother's words about giving when you had little to give. But more than that, she'd found a friend in Catherine, who volunteered alongside her, learning to see the world through different eyes. They started a foundation together, powered by Wright money but guided by Martinez. Principles that everyone deserves dignity, that kindness costs nothing, and that the smallest act of compassion can ripple outward in ways you never expect. On the anniversary of that freezing November night, Rachel stood in the newly renovated community center they'd built in her old neighborhood, watching children play and families connect. Thomas Wright stood beside her, and Catherine was reading to a group of kids in the corner. Her designer shoes replaced with practical sneakers, her carefully styled hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Your mother was right, Thomas said quietly. Wealth isn't what you keep. It's what you give away when you have little to give. Rachel smiled, thinking of that figure huddled beneath a broken bus shelter, of a choice made on a cold, dark night when it would have been so much easier to stay inside. She thought of how one moment of kindness had created a wave of change that touched hundreds of lives now, and would touch thousands more. She used to say something else too, Rachel replied, watching Emma help a younger child with a puzzle. She said that we're all connected, that what we do for others we do for ourselves, that the world only gets better when we decide to be better. To being better, Thomas said, raising an imaginary glass. To being better? Rachel echoed, and meant it with every fiber of her being.